The morning started like every other quiet blue ordinary until I saw the water. It came from the purifier near my nightstand, flowing in a thin, steady line that used to sound like peace. But that morning, the sound carried something else, a hollow echo like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The stream looked wrong, not crystal, not alive. Under the soft light of 7:12 a.m., it shimmered pale gray, almost milky. A faint metallic scent drifted up sharp enough to make my throat tighten. I leaned closer. My name is Xandra Hale, 60 years old, former environmental consultant for the state of Oregon. For 3 decades, I tested rivers, inspected treatment systems, and spent more time with water samples than with people. Water never lied to me. And that morning, it was lying. I swirled the glass gently. Tiny bubbles clung to the sides, refusing to rise. My pulse slowed with every rotation. Something chemical was trapped in that water. Footsteps padded across the hallway. "Morning," Mom said. Caleb, my 35-year-old son. His voice was clipped, his shirt still half-tucked. "You're up early. I think the filter's leaking," I said, holding up the cloudy glass. "Look at this." He squinted, shrugged. "Probably just air in the pipes. I'll call the technician later." "I replaced it 2 weeks ago," I said. "That shouldn't happen." Caleb opened the fridge, poured himself orange juice. "Please don't start taking it apart, okay? Those systems are complicated. I used to certify them for a living," I said. He smiled politely the way you smile at someone who's repeating an old story. "I know, Mom. But things change. Just let me handle it." The words fell with practiced calm. Let me handle it. They always sounded more like, stay out of it. He kissed my forehead out of habit, then left for work. The door closed with a sound I couldn't quite name, somewhere between distance and dismissal. Downstairs, Tara, my daughter, was packing her lunch. "You're awake early," she said. "Coffee? No thanks. The water purifier's acting strange." She didn't look up. "Maybe you overcleaned it again." The jab stung, though her tone was light. Tara, 32, had moved back home last spring to save money. Her divorce had left her raw, withdrawn. She used to be the one who followed me to testing sites, asking about pH meters and river samples. Now she barely looked me in the eye. "Can you just check it for me?" I asked. "You still remember how to test residue, don't you, Mom?" "You're worrying over nothing," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Water's water." She left the kitchen with that final line floating behind her, and for a moment the silence pressed against my chest. I turned back to the counter. A small puddle had formed beneath the purifier's spout. The sunlight touched it like silver dust. I bent down, ran a finger through it, slick, almost oily. Something twisted in my stomach. Not mineral, not city sediment, artificial. I wrote a note in my ledger out of instinct: cloudy water, domestic source, potential contamination. I wasn't panicking, not yet. Procedure always saved me. Isolate the anomaly, verify pattern, document everything. I opened the cabinet where I kept manuals and warranties. The invoice from the purifier company was clipped neatly inside installer Miguel Ortiz. Maintenance due April 7th. Below in handwriting, I didn't recognize someone had written private service. Arranged by CH. My initials aren't CH, Caleb's are. The air felt suddenly thin. By noon, I hadn't drunk a sip of water. I boiled coffee instead, but even that tasted metallic. I sat by the window, notebook open, watching the reflection of the cloudy glass. It hit me then. The filter had been changed only 3 days after Tara returned from a work retreat, and Caleb had been the one who insisted on installing it himself. I replayed every small thing I'd ignored: sealed boxes arriving late at night, receipts crumpled and tossed, hushed conversations in the living room. Grief makes you see ghosts, I told myself, but ghosts don't tamper with filters. The next morning, a white van pulled into the driveway exactly at 9. I stood by the window as a man stepped out, tanned skin, salt and pepper beard, dark blue uniform with the logo Ortiz Water Systems. He moved carefully like someone used to crawling under tight spaces, but his eyes were quick, curious, alive. "Mrs. Holt," he asked, offering a hand. "Miguel Ortiz. Your son called about the purifier." "Yes," I said. "It's upstairs." He nodded, picked up his toolbox, and followed me down the hallway. When we reached my room, the faint hum of the purifier filled the silence. Miguel knelt beside it, removing the back panel with slow, deliberate movements. The air smelled faintly of metal and detergent. For a long time, he didn't say a word. Then I noticed the tremor in his hand as he reached deeper inside the housing. He touched something, paused, and his expression changed. The color drained from his face as if the light itself had been pulled out. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked up at me, eyes wide, the kind of look people get when logic meets fear. "Who installed this system, ma'am, my son?" I said carefully. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because this isn't a standard installation." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He screwed the cover back on, wiped his palms on his pants, then stood slowly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Pack your things," he said. "Leave this house and don't tell your children." The room fell silent except for the slow drip of the purifier. I stared at him, waiting for some explanation, but his face, pale trembling, told me enough. He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "Please, Mrs. Holt, I'll contact you tonight. But for now, do not drink the water. Do not stay here." My throat went dry. I looked at the purifier again, its green indicator light blinking calmly, pretending everything was fine. Then I looked at the glass on my nightstand, the same milky shimmer. I didn't ask another question. I just grabbed my coat, my folder of documents, and my father's watch from the dresser. As I stepped outside, the winter air cut across my face, sharp and clean. Behind me, the purifier hummed once more, a single drop falling into the sink, a sound that used to mean purity. Now it sounded like a warning. Miguel's hand was trembling when he screwed the back panel into place. The sound of the metal cap tightening echoed through the room, sharp and uneasy. He didn't look at me as he gathered his tools, just wiped his palms against his jeans and whispered, "We can't talk here." He motioned toward the kitchen. I followed him downstairs, my mind still caught in that blinking green light upstairs, the purifier pretending nothing was wrong. The kettle on the stove whistled softly as he leaned against the counter. His voice was low, careful. "In the cartridge," he said, "there's something that doesn't belong." I frowned. "A defect, contaminated resin." He shook his head. "Not a defect, a modification." The word modification felt like a pin through my chest, meaning Miguel exhaled through his nose, steadying his tone. "Someone tampered with the purifier, ma'am. The internal line was rerouted. A second valve, hand-installed. It's not in any standard model." He glanced around the kitchen as if the walls might be listening. "That system didn't come from my company. It's been altered." For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of wind through the chimney. I tried to make sense of it. Could it just be a manufacturing issue? A recall, he looked straight into my eyes, voice low and flat. "No, this was deliberate." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressing like gravity itself had thickened. I stared at my hands resting on the table. My fingers had faint smudges from the water earlier, almost invisible, but when I rubbed them together, they felt rough. A metallic tang clung to my skin. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet. The water came out milky white for a few seconds, then cleared. Miguel watched. "Don't touch it," he said. But I did. I let it run over my palms anyway. The smell was faint but sharp, like something sterile, artificial. I rubbed my fingertips together. They squeaked against each other as if coated with something slick. I rinsed again. The feeling didn't leave. My breath hitched. "You're telling me someone put something inside the filtration line of a household purifier?" Miguel nodded. His eyes darted toward the living room. "You said your son scheduled the installation?" "Yes, and he lives here. He and my daughter, both." His jaw tightened. He didn't speak right away, just adjusted his cap, scanning the hallway behind me. Upstairs, I heard footsteps, heavy, quick. The front door slammed. Caleb leaving for work. Almost immediately, another sound, a click of a door lock. Tara's room. The house fell quiet again, but now the silence felt different, controlled, measured. Miguel lowered his voice to a whisper. "Ma'am, I've worked in this business 20 years. I've seen everything: mold, metal corrosion, even sabotage cases in factories. But not this, not in a private home." "What exactly did you see?" I asked. He hesitated, his thumb tracing the handle of his wrench. "A hidden compartment under the filter housing. It's feeding into the line that connects to your drinking tap. Small tube, less than an inch in diameter. Someone installed it intentionally. It doesn't filter anything. It adds." My chest went cold. "It adds?" He nodded. "There's residue. White granular. I didn't touch it." I backed up a step, gripping the counter for balance. For years, I'd trusted systems, pipes, gauges, chemical equations. Nothing in my home had ever felt foreign. Until now. "Can you tell what it is?" I asked. "Not without testing." He opened his toolbox, pulled out a small plastic vial, and held it between his fingers. "I can remove the cartridge and send it to a lab, quietly." I looked up the staircase. The green light from the purifier was faintly visible through the open door. It blinked innocent. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Miguel's tone softened. "Whatever they put in there wasn't meant to clean your water." The words landed like a verdict. He knelt under the sink, disconnecting the lower pipe. I stood beside him, useless, watching as he slid the filter assembly into a plastic bag. Every motion he made was deliberate, fast, efficient, silent. When he sealed the bag, I caught another whiff of that same sharp scent, sterile, chemical, unfamiliar. It reminded me of the laboratories I used to visit in Portland, the tang of oxidizers and formalin. He straightened up. "Where's your basement access by the pantry?" "Good," he said. "If they modified the upper system, there might be a reservoir line below. I'll check." We walked through the hallway. My house had never felt so alien. The photos of Caleb and Tara on the wall looked staged smiles, frozen under the weight of something unsaid. Miguel pulled the basement door open. The hinges creaked. Cold air seeped upward, carrying a smell of damp earth and metal. He pointed his flashlight downward. "I'll take a quick look. Don't follow." I watched his figure disappear into the darkness. The beam of light wavered between pipes' shadows, moving like restless ghosts. Every thump, every clang of his wrench sounded louder than it should have. Then silence. I called softly, Miguel, no answer. A minute passed before I heard his footsteps climbing back up. He emerged pale, the flashlight still on his breathing, uneven. "There's an auxiliary valve down there," he said. "Connected to your purifier line. It's not standard. Someone drilled through the main pipe and patched it with a manual switch." "Why would anyone do that?" I whispered. He turned off the flashlight. "That's what we're going to find out." I reached for a chair and sat down slowly. My knees felt weak. Miguel placed the sealed filter on the table. "I'll take this with me. I'll get it analyzed by a colleague, someone I trust." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Should I tell the police?" He shook his head. "Not yet. We need proof of what's inside first. If it's what I think, it's serious. But if we go too early, whoever did it might destroy the evidence." I pressed my palms together, feeling the dry, sticky texture that wouldn't wash off. "You think it's poison?" Miguel didn't answer. His silence was enough. He tucked the plastic bag into his toolbox and closed the latch. Before leaving, he looked back at me, eyes steady, voice almost gentle. "Mrs. Holt, do not use any water in this house until I call you. Not for drinking, not even for washing." The air in the kitchen thickened, filled with the faint scent of chlorine and fear. When the door closed behind him, I stood motionless. Outside, the sound of his van faded down the street. Inside the house was quiet except for the faint drip from the kitchen faucet. I turned it off, but the smell of metal lingered on my hands. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment I stopped being a mother in her home and became an investigator in a crime scene. Miguel returned just before sunset. He didn't call first, he simply knocked twice the same rhythm as that morning. When I opened the door, his face said everything he hadn't slept, and whatever he'd found hadn't brought comfort. "I need to show you something," he said. "We have to go back down there." I hesitated. The thought of the basement made my chest tighten. The air from that place had felt heavy even before I knew why. Still, I nodded. He carried a stronger flashlight this time, and a small pressure gauge clipped to his belt. As we descended, each step creaked underfoot. The deeper we went, the colder the air became, smelling faintly of rust and disinfectant. The beam from his flashlight sliced through the dark, catching glints of metal along the walls. The pipes ran like veins across the ceiling, old copper lines, insulated PVC, and one new stainless steel tube running in a direction it shouldn't. Miguel stopped at the far end of the room. "Here," he said quietly. "This wasn't in your renovation plans, was it?" I shook my head. "No. The main water line ends there behind the furnace." He crouched and brushed away a layer of dust. Underneath was a square of steel barely visible bolted into the concrete. A faint vibration hummed beneath it, rhythmic like a slow heartbeat. "What is that?" I asked. He ran his hand along the edge of the steel. "A reservoir cap. Someone installed a secondary tank below the surface." "That's impossible," I whispered. Miguel's eyes met mine. Someone did. Recently. He pried open the bolts with a wrench. The lid lifted with a metallic groan, and a thin mist rose from the hole, cool, chemical, sterile. The smell hit first a mix of chlorine and something sweeter, almost like antifreeze. He aimed the flashlight inside. I leaned closer, my stomach tightening. A small stainless chamber reflected the light back at us. Inside were thin tubes leading to a compact electric pump. But what made my breath hitch were the objects lined neatly along the side, a dozen small syringes, each sealed in plastic, filled with liquid ranging from clear to pale yellow. The labels had been scraped off, leaving only faint adhesive shadows. Miguel didn't move for a few seconds. Then he murmured, "This isn't part of any filtration system I've ever seen." I crouched beside him. Syringes. What would those even be for? He exhaled. "They're connected to a microvalve. Someone designed it so that a controlled amount of liquid could be injected into the water stream small doses over time." My mouth went dry. "Injected into the water." He nodded. "And based on this wiring, the system's not manual. It's automated." He took out his gauge and connected it to the line. A faint click followed by a slow, pulsing hiss. The needle on his meter trembled. He frowned. "Pressure spikes at night. There's a timer here." He angled the flashlight toward a small black box fixed to the wall beside the pump. A digital timer blinked red numbers, 02:15 a.m., 02:45 a.m. "See that," he said. "The pump activates for 30 minutes every night. That's when the additive is released." I stared at the clock display, unable to breathe. 2:15. That was when I usually woke up thirsty, drank a glass of water from my bedside purifier, and went back to sleep. Who could even build something like this? I asked. Miguel's jaw tightened. Someone who knew the property layout. Someone with access to the main lines and enough technical knowledge to avoid detection. I gripped the railing to steady myself. The beam of his flashlight wavered across the concrete wall, revealing faint pencil marks, measurements, arrows and initials in blue ink. I stepped closer. Wait. Those markings. Miguel followed my gaze. Recognize them, I've seen that handwriting before. I ran my fingers over the faint letters, precise, methodical, written in a way I couldn't forget. When Leonard, my late husband, built this house, he'd left all the old blueprints in a leather tube in his study. Caleb had studied engineering for a few years before switching careers. He was the only one who ever understood the plumbing layout better than I did. Miguel noticed the change in my face. Who else besides you would have access to the original plans I didn't answer right away? My throat felt tight. My son, Caleb. The words sounded foreign, as if they belonged to someone else. Miguel pointed to the floor beneath the reservoir. Whoever did this had the exact blueprints. They drilled through a section that only someone familiar with the structure would know existed. It's hidden under insulation and concrete. You'd never guess it was here. I stared at the open chamber, the small syringes glinting like trapped fireflies. A thin droplet slid down one of them, catching the light before disappearing into the tank below. "Close it," I whispered. "Please close it." Miguel sealed the lid again and bolted it shut. The clang of metal against concrete echoed through the basement like a gavel. When he stood up, his face was pale. "Mrs. Holt, I think you should stay somewhere else tonight." I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner. I turned to the stairs, gripping the railing. As we climbed, I felt each step vibrate faintly beneath my feet, the heartbeat of that hidden pump still running below, silent but alive. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of bottled water, my hands still trembling. Miguel spread his notes across the counter, rough sketches, photos, and measurements he'd taken. I caught sight of one line he'd written in hurried block letters: secondary injection system, deliberate installation, access by resident. I looked at him. "You're sure it wasn't a contractor, someone who came during the renovation?" He shook his head. "If this was installed by an outsider, your main shutoff valve would have been disturbed. It wasn't. Whoever did it had free access probably over several days and knew exactly how not to leave traces." He hesitated before adding, "The electrical feed runs through the main circuit breaker inside your son's workshop." That sentence landed heavier than the rest. "My son's workshop," I repeated quietly. Miguel met my eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but all the signs point there." After he left, I went straight to Leonard's old study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I opened the drawer where we'd kept the property records and unrolled the original plumbing blueprint. The paper crackled softly under my hands. In the lower right corner, above the signature of the architect, was a note written years later in blue ink revised layout. "New filtration line route approved." Below it, Caleb's full signature. I traced the letters slowly, my hand shaking. The room seemed to tilt. Every memory of him, his quiet smile, the way he used to fix the sprinkler system with his father, his insistence on taking over the renovation, flashed through my mind and shattered like glass. My own son had the keys to every pipe, every valve, every inch of this house. And suddenly the phrase Miguel had whispered hours earlier echoed in my head. Whatever they put in there wasn't meant to clean your water. Now I knew who had made sure of that. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep. The house was too still, the kind of silence that listens back. In the kitchen, the bottled water Miguel had left sat untouched. I took one look at the sink faucet and turned away. The plastic sample tube lay inside a sealed bag on the counter, milky white water trapped like a secret. I couldn't trust the local lab. Too many questions would come. So I drove north toward the city I used to call home. For 23 years, I worked as an environmental chemist at Clearstream Analytical. Back then, water had been my language. I could read minerals the way other people read faces. When I retired, I promised myself I'd never set foot inside that gray concrete building again. Yet here I was, gripping the steering wheel as the old sign came into view. Inside the corridors hadn't changed fluorescent light, humming above the smell of ethanol and coffee blending into something both sharp and nostalgic. I found an old friend in the back office, Dr. Harper, same white streak in his hair, same habit of tapping his pen 3 times before speaking. "Xandra Holt," he said, half smiling. "I thought you'd traded pipettes for gardening gloves." "Almost did," I said, handing him the sealed bag. "But I need a favor," quietly. He frowned at the cloudy liquid. "Home sample." "Yes." From my personal system. Contaminant suspicion. "More than suspicion," I said softly. He nodded, once professional instinct taking over. Within minutes, we were in Lab 3. The hum of machines filled the room like a low symphony. Harper wore gloves and cracked the seal, pouring a few milliliters into the analyzer tray. The spectrometer blinked to life, its blue beam scanning through the sample. While we waited, I stared at the tray of reagents beside me: acid washes, neutralizers, oxalate binders. My hands remembered the rhythm of the old days. Drop swirl, wait for the reaction. The smell of isopropanol stirred something bittersweet. Harper's monitor beeped. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "That's strange," he murmured. "You're showing elevated oxalate derivatives complex, not free ions." I frowned. "Industrial grade." He hesitated. "Modified. Oxalate mixtures like this don't appear naturally. They're synthesized usually for corrosion control, or in some rare cases, slow-release cleaning compounds." My stomach clenched. What if it's consumed over time? He turned to me, his face sober. Chronic exposure could cause calcium depletion, renal stress, liver dysfunction. Small amounts wouldn't show symptoms immediately, but accumulation over months, years could do serious damage. A quiet whine escaped the machine as another reading printed out oxalate concentration, 7.4 mmol. The safe level for drinking water was less than 1. I stared at the number until it blurred. Whoever did this, Harper said carefully, knew exactly what they were doing. This isn't some random contamination. This is precision dosing. The words landed like lead. I thought of Caleb's neat handwriting on the blueprint, the way he used to explain chemical balance to his sister when they were children. He'd always been curious, meticulous, too much like me. Harper placed a hand on my arm. "Do you want me to run a second verification?" "No," I said, voice barely steady. "That's enough." He printed the chromatogram and sealed it in an envelope. "You'll need this, whatever you plan next." On the drive home, the world outside looked washed out. Trees, bare sky, the color of cold metal. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than I remembered. Somewhere between the highway signs and the frozen fields, a memory surfaced. Sophie was 10, and we'd spent that summer testing tap water from every neighbor on our street. I had bought her a tiny beaker set, pink safety goggles, and a journal, where she scribbled observations in uneven handwriting. "Look, Mom," she'd said once, holding up a vial. "It looks clean, but it isn't." Her eyes had sparkled with pride when the reagent turned faintly blue, proof of hidden calcium deposits. Back then, I thought I was teaching her curiosity. Now I wondered if I had only taught my children how invisible danger could be. By the time I reached home, dusk had settled. The house looked peaceful from the outside, every window lit warm and steady. But inside, something was wrong. The air felt thicker, as if holding its breath. I called out Caleb, no answer. Sophie's door was half open. On her desk lay an open notebook, the kind she used for sketching. I glanced at it without meaning to. Inside were tidy notes written in blue ink lists of measurements, pH levels, concentrations, words like flow rate solution control, sample B mix. I froze. Her pen rested across the page uncapped. A sound in the hallway made me turn heart-pounding, but it was only the clock striking 6. I closed the notebook gently, my fingers trembling. It couldn't be. Sophie was kind, soft-spoken. She loved animals, baked cookies on weekends. She wasn't capable of this. Still, the numbers in that notebook matched the same handwriting I'd seen on the blueprint annotations downstairs. Maybe Caleb hadn't acted alone. In the living room, the phone on the table blinked a missed call notification. I dialed my son's number immediately. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again. "Ethan, it's Mom," I said, forgetting how formal I'd become with my own child. "Call me back, please." Silence. Outside, the lake glimmered faintly under the porch light, its surface calm, deceitfully clean like the water that had nearly become my undoing. I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out Harper's report beside Miguel's sketches. My hands ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. For decades, water had been my ally, predictable, measurable, obedient to physics. Now it had turned against me. Or rather, someone had turned it against me. I opened my old notebook, the one I kept since retirement, where I recorded thoughts instead of data. My pen hovered over the blank page for a long time before I finally wrote, My own water betrayed me. The ink bled slightly on the paper, spreading like a slow stain, quiet, deliberate, unstoppable. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep upstairs. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like evidence. I sat by the window until dawn crept across the lake, its reflection fractured and colorless. Somewhere in that thin line between light and water, a realization settled cold and clear. The poison hadn't been in the pipes for months. It had been running through my life for years. I didn't tell anyone what the lab found, not yet. There's a kind of silence that isn't weakness, it's calculation. For the next 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Caleb went to work early, claiming another client installation. Sophie stayed mostly in her room, typing on her laptop, humming softly through the door. I kept the same routine tea at 8, reading by the window, a walk around the lake. But every movement now carried intention. The morning after the test results, I opened the old file cabinet in Leonard's study. The hinges squeaked faintly like a voice warning me to stop. I ignored it. Inside were folders I hadn't touched since his funeral tax records, property documents, his $680,000 life insurance policy, and every repair invoice since the house was built. I scanned each page with the camera on my phone, methodically labeling the files in quiet rhythm water system, insurance, mortgage, estate. I wanted to believe this was just precaution, but I'd learned long ago that data is power, and I no longer had the luxury of trust. Miguel came by the following afternoon, parking 2 streets away as we'd agreed. He wore plain clothes and carried a laptop instead of tools. We sat in the back garden beneath the birch tree, the air sharp with early frost. "I've traced the wiring," he said, pulling up diagrams. "The secondary pump links directly to a smart relay. It sends activity logs to an external drive, meaning your system was transmitting data, probably to a nearby device, maybe even a personal computer inside the house." My pulse quickened. So they monitored how much I drank. He nodded, and possibly adjusted the dosage remotely. The words made my skin prickle. I looked out toward the lake, its reflection perfectly still, hiding everything beneath. Miguel leaned closer. "Don't confront them yet. Let's gather proof first. If you go in without evidence, they'll turn this around on you. Play the quiet game, Mrs. Holt. Let them think you're still in the dark." I met his eyes. "Quiet is something I do well." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll win." When he left, he handed me a small flash drive. "Everything I've copied so far, schematics, timestamps, pressure readings. Keep it hidden. Water might betray you, but paper and data won't." I tucked it into the lining of Leonard's old leather planner next to the insurance copy. That night, the house felt unusually still. The air carried a faint metallic tang, the kind I once associated with rusted pipes. I walked through each room, slowly checking locks, unplugging small appliances, turning off the main water valve to my room. As I passed the hallway mirror, my reflection startled me. I hadn't noticed how much my eyes had changed, no longer soft, no longer searching. They held the same cold steadiness I used to see in chemical beakers under fluorescent light, clear measured, potentially dangerous. Around 10, a soft knock came at my door. It was Sophie. She peeked in carrying a glass of water on a small tray. "Mom, you didn't come down for dinner. I made sure you stayed hydrated." Her tone was gentle, almost tender, the kind of tone that once made me believe she was incapable of harm. I smiled faintly. "Thank you, sweetheart." She placed the glass on my nightstand. "It's from the kitchen filter. I cleaned it earlier." I nodded. "You're thoughtful." Sophie lingered a second too long before leaving. The hallway light cast her shadow against the door, elongated, still listening. Then it moved away. I sat there staring at the glass. Tiny bubbles clung to the rim, refracting the bedside lamp into tiny shards of light. It would have looked ordinary to anyone else. I reached for it, but not to drink. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet slightly, and poured the water down the drain. The sound of it gurgling through the pipes was strangely satisfying, like releasing something that had been waiting too long to escape. When the last drop disappeared, I caught my reflection in the sink's metal curve. The overhead light fractured across the stainless surface, cutting my face into halves, past and present, mother and investigator. I whispered, "Not tonight." Later, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. Every page now bore numbers, notes, connections, dates of strange illnesses, days I'd felt faint, weeks when Caleb had adjusted the system for maintenance. I added the lab results, oxalate concentration, 7.4 mg/ml. Below it, I drew a single line, intentional, not accidental. The clock ticked softly in the corner. Somewhere downstairs, I heard faint footsteps, slow, deliberate. A door creaked, then silence. I waited until the noise stopped, then went to the kitchen. The refrigerator hum blended with the soft drip of the faucet. I ran my fingers along the countertop until they brushed the edge of a notebook, Sophie's. It was new, untouched, but one page had been torn out cleanly. I opened the drawer where I used to keep her childhood drawings, crayon sketches of trees, of our dog, of me. The colors had faded, but the signature in the corner was still there. Sophie Holt, age 9. Underneath the bright strokes, faint lines of measurement were visible. She'd used the same ruler back then as she did now. I pressed my hand against the paper. The ache wasn't just from betrayal, it was from recognition. She was mine in every way, including the dangerous ones. At midnight, I walked to the basement door and locked it. Then I returned upstairs and shut off the main valve completely. No water would run through my pipes tonight. Before bed, I checked the flash drive again, holding it up to the lamplight. So small, yet it contained the truth of everything that had poisoned this house. I slipped it under the floorboard beneath my bed, a habit from the days when Leonard kept emergency cash there. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection once more in the dark window. The glass reflected the faint outline of my face, lit only by the moonlight, filtering through thin curtains. The surface shimmered faintly, and for a moment it looked like water. But this time it didn't look back at me. It waited. The next morning would bring confrontation evidence and maybe freedom, but tonight was about survival. Silence had become my armor, observation my weapon. Some poisons are meant to kill quickly. Others, like trust, dissolve one molecule at a time, and I was done drinking both. Miguel arrived at dawn with 2 thermos flasks and a brown envelope. This time, he said, setting the envelope on the counter, we do it by the book. He wore latex gloves, labeling every sample bottle with neat block letters. We collected water from every tap, every purifier outlet, every storage tank. I followed silently, noting the time and temperature the way I used to during audits years ago. When he was done, he sealed each tube in a clear bag. No municipal lab, he said. I'm sending these to Everpure Analytics. Independent, out of state, no leaks. I nodded. Good. The samples left with the morning courier. For a few hours, I almost allowed myself to breathe normally. But evening came too fast, and the silence that followed was worse than waiting for bad news. It was the silence that knows. 3 days later, Miguel called. Results are in, he said. Can I come by? When he arrived, his face carried the same calm I'd seen in doctors who had delivered irreversible diagnoses. He placed the printed report on my table. Ethylene glycol, he said softly. The words felt heavy, poisonous in themselves. It's the compound used in antifreeze, he continued. Harmless to touch but deadly if ingested. Metabolizes into oxalate crystals in the liver. That's why the earlier test flagged oxalate. This was the source. I stared at the chemical diagram on the page. 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, 2 hydroxyl groups, so simple, so fatal. He tapped the second page. They found it in traceable patterns. Someone mixed it with distilled water diluted just enough to avoid detection. Whoever did this wasn't guessing. Measured doses. I said quietly. Controlled. Exactly. Look here. He turned the page. There, printed in black and white, was the concentration chart, 3 dilution ratios, recorded weekly over a span of 5 months. The ratios follow a pattern, Miguel said. They match something I found in your daughter's files. My head snapped up. Sophie's. He slid his laptop forward, showing a digital document he'd retrieved from the backup drive I didn't even know existed. It was titled Calcium Retention Study, SH. She ran experiments on water purification last year, he said. Mostly safe educational stuff. But see this formula. He pointed to a line, C-H6O2 dilution factor, 0.C QSF value per liter incremental, 0.5 weekly. I read it twice. My throat went dry. That's the same ratio the lab detected. Miguel's voice dropped. This wasn't impulsive, it's systematic. I closed my eyes. Systematic. The word burned deeper than poison ever could. Outside wind brushed the windows, carrying the faint creak of frozen branches. I stared at the page again, numbers lined up with surgical precision. Sophie's handwriting perfect as always, the same neatness she'd inherited from me. For years, I'd told her discipline was power. I never imagined she'd learn to weaponize it. Miguel leaned forward. I don't think she's acting alone. The idea wasn't new. It had been circling me for days, but hearing it spoken aloud made my stomach twist. Why do you say that? I asked. He opened another file, a spreadsheet of transactions. I traced an unusual purchase chemical supply order shipped to your address 6 months ago, but the payment came from a shared account under Caleb's name. And here, he pointed to the corner, a transfer of $1,400 2 weeks later. Destination unknown. The numbers looked sterile, detached, yet every digit was a wound. Where did you get this? I asked. I know someone in logistics. They owed me a favor. But Xandra, this is serious. Someone needed money. Someone else knew how to get it. And you were the link between both. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady the rhythm of my breathing. My children, I said, almost whispering. They built a pipeline not for water, but for money. Across town at that same moment, Caleb Ethan in the lab records was sitting in his truck phone, pressed to his ear. You said Friday, a voice growled from the other end. You know what happens if the payment doesn't come through. I'm working on it, he muttered, glancing toward his dashboard. She's still here. The house isn't sold yet. Then find another way, the voice hissed. They need the money by Friday. The line went dead. Caleb's hands trembled as he started the engine. When Miguel left that evening, he handed me a second flash drive. I've encrypted everything he said. Keep this away from your home network. If they're monitoring, they won't know what we've found. After he drove off, I sat alone in the kitchen, the report spread before me. The clock ticked, 8:17. I didn't turn on the lights. I read every line again, ethylene, glycol concentration, dosage, intervals, signature markers. The evidence was undeniable. And in that moment, pieces aligned. Caleb's financial strain, Sophie's old chemical notebooks, their shared secrecy, the late-night whispers through the vents when they thought I was asleep. I remembered the one time Caleb mentioned an investment gone wrong, a friend who promised returns. I remembered Sophie's sudden new laptop, her uncharacteristic nervousness, when I asked where it came from. They weren't trying to kill me out of hatred. They were trying to solve a problem. And I had been the most convenient equation. I took out my notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of a fresh page, water reveals everything. The pen tip scratched the paper softly. Water had always been honest. It dissolved truth as easily as it dissolved minerals. It carried secrets through pipes, across walls, into mouths. Now it was carrying mine, every trace of what they'd done, every number Miguel had uncovered. I ran my finger along the rim of my teacup. It was dry. For once, that felt like safety. I stood looking around the kitchen that had once been the heart of our home. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered, covering something sour underneath. Tomorrow I'd confront neither of them, not yet. Tomorrow I'd visit the lawyer who had handled Leonard's estate. I'd need to confirm something about the beneficiary clause in his policy, something I'd long ignored. But tonight I wrote one last line in my notebook. They poisoned water for money. I'll cleanse it with truth. Then I closed the cover, turned off the light, and listened to the hum of the empty pipes, the only sound left that still felt honest. That Friday morning, I stood by the bedroom window pretending to pack. 2 canvas bags, a folded sweater, a paperback novel I hadn't opened in years, all props in a play I'd written overnight. On the kitchen counter, I left a note in careful cursive weekend at Willow Bay. Back Monday. Don't wait up. The handwriting looked steady, but the ink bled slightly where my hand had trembled. Outside, the neighborhood was half asleep. A delivery truck passed and wind rustled the pine trees by the gate. I could see Caleb's car parked across the street hood, still warm from his early drive. Sophie's window upstairs was open a crack. Everything appeared ordinary. That was exactly what I needed. I double-checked the small black camera hidden in the spice rack. Miguel had set it up the night before, disguised as a jar labeled paprika. It streamed directly to a secure cloud folder under his name. "Pretend you're gone," he'd said. "Let them reveal themselves." I smiled at the memory, a brittle, practiced smile. At 10:30, I wheeled my suitcase down the driveway, waved at the neighbor, and drove 2 blocks away to Miguel's truck, waiting behind the old oak tree. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "If we're right, this is the only way to prove intent." He nodded once and handed me a small remote. "This controls the secondary camera in the basement, motion activated. It'll start recording the moment anyone opens the storage hatch." "Good," I said, placing it in my coat pocket. "Now we wait." Miguel would return later under the pretext of checking the filter installation. I would stay at his sister's place across town, monitoring the live feed through his laptop. For the first time in weeks, the house would belong to its other inhabitants without the mask they wore around me. By afternoon, I sat in a small kitchen 20 miles away, eyes fixed on the screen. The live feed showed my empty living room, soft sunlight filtering through curtains. A half-full mug of tea sat untouched, another deliberate prop. At 3:12 p.m., the front door opened. Caleb stepped in first, tossing his jacket onto the couch. Sophie followed, arms crossed. Their voices were low but sharp. "I told you she's acting strange," Sophie said. "She keeps watching everything." "You're paranoid," Caleb replied. "She's just old." "Old doesn't mean stupid," Sophie shot back. "She tested the water, Caleb. The plumber was here again yesterday." "What if he found something?" Caleb turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "You said you erased the logs." "I did. But he's not just a plumber. He knew what he was looking for." A heavy pause. Then Caleb exhaled through clenched teeth. "All right, if she suspects us, we can't wait any longer." The words made my pulse pound in my ears. I leaned closer to the laptop, barely breathing. Miguel was in the house at that exact moment, quietly checking the basement reservoir. His camera glasses captured every word. He froze half-hidden behind the furnace, the faint hum of machinery masking his breath. Sophie's voice echoed faintly through the vent. "You said Plan A would work, that she'd just fade out. It would have, Caleb said, if she hadn't brought that damn plumber back." "So what now?" There was a metallic clink, probably Caleb's keys hitting the counter. Then his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Then we moved to Plan B." Miguel's hand tightened on the wrench he was holding. Sophie hesitated. "What's Plan B?" Caleb's answer came like the click of a gun safety. "Make it look like a heater explosion." Silence. Then a single drop of water hit the floor, echoing like a countdown. "You're serious," Sophie whispered. "She has insurance," Caleb said flatly. "Accidental death. No autopsy, no questions. It'll clear the debt and you'll get your share." For a moment, even the air in the basement seemed to stop moving. Miguel reached into his pocket, pressed the small recorder on. The red light blinked once steady. "Don't back out now," Caleb warned. "We do it tomorrow. I'll rewire the circuit tonight." "She's supposed to be gone for the weekend," Sophie murmured. "Perfect. Gives me time to stage everything." Their footsteps moved toward the kitchen. Miguel waited until he heard the back door close before he emerged from the shadows. Sweat glistened on his temple. He lifted his phone, snapped photos of the modified heater valve, and sent them to his private email. Subject line, proof. Plan B. Then he slipped out the side door unseen. Meanwhile, I sat staring at the frozen video feed, my hand gripping the edge of the table. Plan B. Heater explosion. The words replayed in my head until they became mechanical, meaningless sounds that still managed to tear through me. I thought of the water, the chemicals, the deliberate patience. Now they wanted fire. Destruction had evolved from invisible to spectacular. I stood up, pacing. Every part of me wanted to call them scream confront. But Miguel's voice echoed in memory, "Don't confront yet. Let the evidence speak." So I waited. At 7:05 p.m., the phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Mom, don't drink the water until we fix it." For a second, I couldn't move. The message blinked under the dim light of the kitchen, simple and chilling. Out of context, it could have sounded caring, but every word carried a shadow. Don't drink the water until we fix it, until we fix you. The realization spread through me like cold mercury. I typed no reply. Instead, I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Miguel with one line, "She knows, I know." Outside, the sky turned iron gray, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Each drop hit the window like a clock ticking down. Somewhere across town, my children were rewriting my death into an accident report. They didn't know I had already rewritten the ending. Tomorrow, their plan B would meet my plan, quiet, methodical, unburnable. Because if they were willing to turn heat and water into weapons, then I would turn evidence into fire. The next morning, the air smelled of burnt espresso and wet asphalt. I sat in the corner booth of Maple and Main Cafe, facing the glass window streaked with rain. The mug in my hand had gone cold long before Miguel arrived. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing too much. "They confirmed the heater's wiring," he said quietly. "Tampered. Deliberately." I didn't flinch. I had run out of ways to react. What happens now? "Now we call it in," Miguel said, pulling out his phone. "The police will need to." But before he could finish, a familiar voice cut through the hum of the cafe. Mom, Sophie, stood at the entrance umbrella, dripping face composed, but eyes sharp. She approached with that same half-smile she'd learned from her father, polite enough to look innocent, sharp enough to wound. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice calm but tight. "I could ask the same," she replied, glancing toward Miguel. "You've been avoiding our calls." I was worried. The word rolled off her tongue too easily, like she'd rehearsed it. Miguel looked down, pretending to scroll through his phone. I could tell he was already recording. Sophie sat down without being invited, folding her umbrella neatly. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're believing some handyman over your own children." Her tone was honey over glass. "I'm believing what I've seen," I said softly, "and what I've tasted." She leaned closer. "Do you even hear yourself? You sound paranoid." Caleb and I were just what I interrupted, experimenting again. Like when you were 10 and I told you never to mix unknown compounds without supervision. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're twisting everything. He's not who you think he is." Miguel met her gaze, voice steady. "Ma'am, I'm exactly who she thinks I am, the man who found industrial coolant in her water line." Sophie's hand froze halfway to her cup. "That's absurd. It's evidence I said, and it's been recorded." She glanced around the cafe, lowering her voice. "Mom, please. You're letting this stranger drive a wedge between us. You really trust him more than your own daughter?" I set the mug down carefully. The ceramic clicked against the table, sharp as a gavel. "Because strangers don't poison my drinking water." Her eyes flickered 1 second of naked guilt before the mask returned. The cafe's door chimed again. Caleb stepped in, scanning the room until his gaze locked on us. His suit was wrinkled, tie loose, the look of a man trying to seem composed while his world was collapsing. He walked straight to the table, voice low and rehearsed. "Mom, let's go home. We can talk there. Privately." I looked at him, at the face that used to beam with pride when he fixed a faucet or built a birdhouse. That same face now wore calculation instead of compassion. "I think we're fine here," I said. "Mom, please." He reached out a hand. "You're scaring yourself." "People are staring." Miguel shifted slightly, phone in hand pretending to check messages. I knew he'd already dialed the local precinct. The recorder was still running. Sophie tried again, her voice trembling now. "Mom, we didn't mean for any of this to happen. You don't understand the pressure." I turned to her, my voice barely above a whisper. "Pressure doesn't justify poison." Caleb's jaw tightened. We were trying to fix things. To save the house, the business. By killing the person who owns them, I asked. He hesitated just long enough for the lie to collapse. The silence that followed was total. Even the coffee machine hissed to a stop, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Miguel stood. "That's enough," he said quietly. "The police are on their way." Caleb turned to him, fury breaking through the facade. "You don't know what you're talking about." Miguel didn't flinch. "Actually, I do. The audio from last night says otherwise." Sophie's face drained of color. "You recorded us." He looked at me. She deserves to live long enough to tell her side. Caleb slammed his fist against the table, the mugs rattling. "Mom, come on. You're going to believe this." "After everything we've done for you," I met his gaze steadily. "I taught you how to purify water, not how to poison it." The line cut through the noise like a blade. He froze, mouth half open, eyes flicking between me and Miguel, realizing the last thread of control had snapped. Outside, sirens began to wail faintly in the distance. People turned toward the windows. Whispers rippled through the cafe. Sophie stood abruptly. "Mom, please, don't do this." "Do what I asked," softly. "Tell the truth." Miguel glanced at the door. "They're almost here." Caleb straightened his jacket expression, shifting from panic to something colder resignation. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. "No," I said, rising to my feet. "I regret trusting you to care for what I built." A uniformed officer entered, followed by another. Miguel handed over his phone wordlessly. The officer nodded, then looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, yes. We'd like you to come with us to file a statement." Sophie's voice cracked. "Mom, please," I didn't answer. I walked past them, each step heavy but certain. As I reached the door, I paused just long enough to glance back at my children, sitting amid empty cups and half-spilled sugar, their perfect little world dissolving like powder in hot water. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in months, the air tasted clean. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself as the police car lights reflected off the wet pavement. Some truths needed no explanation. They simply rose, clear, unfiltered, undeniable, like pure water, finally free of poison. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, the sky had turned the color of steel. The rain from earlier had settled into a thin mist clinging to everything. Even justice, it seemed, required cleansing. Miguel walked beside me, his coat damp, his silence steady. The sirens had long stopped, replaced by the low hum of waiting. Inside, I could hear the shuffle of papers, the buzz of cameras, and the hollow echo of footsteps that only truth could summon. It started the morning after our confrontation. The police had gone straight to the house with a warrant in hand. I wasn't there, but Miguel filmed everything, a quiet, methodical operation. 2 officers moved through the kitchen first. One opened the cupboard beneath the sink. Another pried open the metal hatch behind the heater. Within minutes, the truth began to surface literally. Coiled under the pipes hidden behind a false wall panel was a compact pump system wired into the water line. A thin hose connected it to a set of containers labeled only with faded chemical codes. The containers looked harmless, like ordinary maintenance supplies, but inside the liquid shimmered faintly blue under the flashlight. Detective Moore, the lead investigator, crouched beside it, gloved hands careful but precise. "This wasn't for filtration," he said to his partner. "This was for dosing." Next came the notebooks, Sophie's handwriting, unmistakable filling page after page, with ratios, notes, and equations. Oxalate variance, temperature yield, test within domestic range, and in the folder on the counter, the final piece, a printed transcript. My son's voice, clear and calm, captured from the cafe recording. Then we moved to Plan B, make it look like a heater explosion. When the officers read that line, one of them closed his eyes briefly as if to let the weight of it sink in. By noon, both of my children were in custody. I didn't go to the police station. I didn't have to. I had already seen enough. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table, now scrubbed spotless and quiet, and poured a glass of water from a new pitcher. The surface rippled once under the ceiling light. For years, I had taught environmental safety, lectured about contamination, warned others how invisible danger hides in plain sight. I'd never imagined it would come from the hands I once held to cross the street. The trial came quickly. The evidence was irrefutable, not because of anger or vengeance or rumor, but because every drop of it was documented. Miguel testified first. His voice was steady, unembellished, factual. I found the foreign pump. I found the chemical residue. I recorded the suspects discussing a staged explosion. The defense tried to discredit him, suggesting fabrication and misinterpretation. But then came the recordings, the lab reports, the photographs of the tubing and wiring, the chemical breakdown sheets bearing Sophie's signature. And finally, the forensic analysis from the state lab, ethylene glycol confirmed. Deliberate injection through auxiliary pump. Exposure duration estimated 3 months. The courtroom was silent. Even the ticking clock on the far wall seemed respectful. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. I trusted what I built. My children forgot that I built systems designed to detect deceit. Detective Moore smiled faintly at that, the first warmth of the entire proceeding. Hours later, as the judge read the verdict, I sat very still. Ethan Hale for attempted manslaughter and conspiracy, 25 years in state custody. Sophie Hale for aiding and abetting, 18 years with parole eligibility after 12. There was no applause, no relief, just the heavy truth of accountability. Ethan looked toward me once, not with remorse, but confusion, like he still couldn't understand how the numbers had turned against him. Sophie wept quietly, but her tears were more for the collapse of her cleverness than for the pain she caused. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply reached for the glass of water set before me, lifted it slowly, and took a sip. It was clear, cool, untainted, everything truth should be. Across the courtroom, Miguel caught my eye. He nodded once. Respectful. Solid. Detective Moore approached after the hearing, removing his hat before speaking. "You saved yourself by trusting your own profession," he said. I smiled faintly. "It's what I was trained to do, separate what's pure from what's poison." He extended his hand. "Ma'am, if more people did that, we'd have less of both." That night, I sat by the window of my rebuilt home. The lights from the lakeshore flickered in the distance, reflecting across the surface like constellations underwater. On the table beside me lay the old filter casing, cleaned and hollow now. I had kept it not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of resilience. Science had given me more than data. It had given me defense. And in a world that had tried to contaminate even the meaning of family, that was enough. I closed my notebook, the last entry written neatly. Truth like water always finds its level. The night deepened around me, silent and still. Somewhere beyond the city, justice flowed slow, steady, and clear. 6 months later, the world had finally quieted. The noise of courtrooms, reporters, and endless explanations had faded into something softer, the steady rhythm of ordinary days. I now lived in a modest apartment overlooking Lake Coeur d'Alene. The air here carried the scent of pine and open water, the kind of clean that didn't need proving. Every morning began the same way. I'd step into the small kitchen barefoot and turn the faucet. The water would flow clear, no cloudiness, no hesitation, no hidden noise behind the pipes. Just the sound of truth running freely again. It was strange how something so simple could feel sacred. The walls of my apartment were lined with books and glass jars. Old habits never left me. I still labeled everything salt, sugar, chloride. Solution neat in my handwriting. Some neighbors found it obsessive. To me, it was order. On the windowsill sat a single orchid, its white petals open wide under morning light. I watered it carefully, one measured cup at a time. I had started keeping a small log again, though not of formulas or reports. This one was called The Ledger of Clarity. Page 1. I have filtered my life the way I once filtered water. Some afternoons Miguel would visit. His limp had worsened from an old injury, but his humor hadn't. He'd bring pastries from the local bakery and 2 cups of black coffee. "You've got the cleanest tap water in the county," he joked once, handing me a report from the municipal board. "Old habits," I said. "Good ones," he replied. Sometimes we'd sit by the window in silence, watching the sunlight break on the surface of the lake. The water caught every glimmer like it remembered what darkness used to taste like, and was proud to have survived it. I didn't talk about Ethan or Sophie much anymore. People asked gently, out of politeness, out of curiosity. "How are your children?" I would answer with a measured calm, "Alive. Learning." Because in truth, I no longer carried hatred for them. That would have been another form of poison. Instead, I carried understanding, the kind that doesn't excuse but accepts. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't a gift you give the guilty. It was a filter one you use to keep your own heart from turning toxic. At night, when the world went still, I'd hear the faint ripple of the lake through the open window. It reminded me of the lab years of test tubes and quiet concentration, of how every clean sample required patience, precision, and care. I found peace in that rhythm again. I'd brew chamomile tea, let the steam rise slowly, and read through my old notebooks. In the margins, I saw the woman I used to be, logical, disciplined, yet naive about how corruption could seep through family just as easily as through soil. But now I wasn't naive. I was clear. One evening, as the sun slipped low and painted the water gold, I walked down to the pier. The boards creaked underfoot, and the air hummed with the sound of small waves. I crouched down, dipped my hand into the lake, and watched the ripples expand outward. The cold water stung a little real alive. For years I whispered I believed water only carried life. A pause. A soft breeze answered. Now I know it also carries truth. That had become my prayer, my daily vow, not of religion, but of reclamation. Every morning I practiced a new ritual, turning on the faucet, letting the stream run, watching it reflect the light until it sparkled. It wasn't just about water anymore. It was about flow. Pain had moved through me the way contamination once had, slowly and visibly, but thoroughly. And like any purification process, it took time and pressure to bring clarity. Clean water, I said one morning to no one in particular, like clean love needs constant filtering. The words echoed softly in the kitchen, blending with the rush of water. I smiled not because it was profound, but because it was true. That day, Miguel stopped by again. He left an envelope on the table, a copy of the final report from the Environmental Safety Commission. Case closed. He tapped it once and said, "It's over, Xandra." I nodded. "It's purified." He laughed softly. "You always have the last word, don't you?" "No," I said, glancing at the window where sunlight danced on the lake. "The last word belongs to the water." Later that evening, I brewed one final cup of tea and sat by the open window. The horizon had turned a deep amber, and the reflection of the setting sun rippled like molten glass. On the table beside me stood a clear glass of water. I lifted it slowly. The surface caught the light, scattering it into tiny shards across the walls. In that light, everything felt new, reborn, refined, renewed. Not revenge, not survival, purification. As the wind brushed past, I whispered the words one last time. For years, I believed water only carried life. Now I know it also carries truth. Clean water, like clean love, needs constant filtering. I took a sip, and the taste was pure, cool, honest. And as the lake reflected the last line of daylight, I finally felt clear inside and out. And that was the story of Xandra Hale, a woman who learned that purity isn't found in perfection, but in persistence. If this story touched you, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to read how her journey spoke to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. It truly helps these real stories reach more hearts like yours. You can also scroll down to the pinned comment below for behind-the-scenes reflections and to join the conversation. Remember, clean water, clean heart, clear mind. See you in the next story.